We are going to be talking about the Questions, Themes, and Theories workspace. And throughout the session, I'll be referring to it as just QTT, or the QTT workspace, just to save a little bit of time. This is a fairly new feature to MAXQDA. You'll find it, it's only in the 2022 version. And it is in all 3 versions of 2022, so whichever one you have, you do have access to this piece of the software. And I think it's just a really great tool. I think it kind of gets at some of the pieces that maybe are a little bit trickier to sort of figure out, figure out how to bring all those pieces of analysis together and to pull them into an actual deliverable. And I think this is a pretty good start. Like I said, this is new. So if you do get into using this after today's session, or if you have been using it already, I encourage you to submit any feedback or ideas, suggestions that you might have to improve the tool. Our developers are always looking for ways to improve. So before we jump in to the session today, let's do a little housekeeping. First up, my name is Joel Drevlo. I am a certified trainer with MAXQDA. I have several years of experience working with MAXQDA doing analysis and research, but I've also done quite a bit of training. In my last organization, I was responsible for training new users and for consulting on research projects. So that's where I really feel at home, and happy to be here with you all today. Some quick notes about the session. I'm going to move through things pretty quickly, but like I said, I am recording this, and you will have a link to that recording probably sometime early next week. So if anything maybe goes by a little too fast, or you want to watch something again, you will have an access to that recording, and you can check that out later. I've got about 30 minutes of material planned today, so I will leave about 10 to 15 at the close of our session for you to ask any questions. So if something pops up as I'm doing a demonstration or showing you something, go ahead and drop that in the chat. Address it to everyone so that we can all see those questions, and or you can open up your mics at the end of the session, and we can chat about whatever questions you might have about QTT or MAXQDA in general. And then the last bit is just keep those mics and mics muted and cameras off so that sound comes through clear for everybody today. I'll mostly just be screen sharing, so won't need the cameras or anything for discussion. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. First, the session's goals, or the agenda for today. I'm going to take you through just a quick overview of QTT. So we'll look at where to find it, what it looks like, what are some of its basic functions. I'll just kind of show you around so you kind of get a little bit oriented. I'm going to actually give you a demonstration after I've kind of outlined the basic idea, emphasis of things. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of how to actually pull in elements into QTT. So what elements you can import, and then actually how to do that from your project file. And then throughout the session today, I'll be sort of making notes about when are some good times to use QTT. Like a lot of features in MAXQDA, there's certain times throughout your project cycle that you will need to use, that you'll be able to use certain features. You'll need to have some sort of analysis done before you can really kind of tap to all of the potential of this feature. So hopefully by the end of this demonstration, you'll get a pretty good sense about when you can incorporate this into your own projects. All right, so that is it for the agenda. Let's go ahead and jump into the project file. So I have just a basic MAXQDA example file today. So we're working with the English work-life balance file. And if you want to follow along with this, you can, or you can just watch. This QTT worksheet is actually built into the example project file. So if you'd like to play around with this later, after you've seen some of this stuff in the session today, you can do that as well. Okay. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open up the QTT file right now. Okay, actually one thing I'm sorry, I should point out first. To find QTT, come up to the analysis options at the top of your ribbon here. And then in the left-hand corner, you'll see QTT, Questions, Themes, and Theories. And that's where you open up the feature. You can also see that you can use Control-Shift-T if you're a hotkey command kind of user. You can use that as well to open this up. And you will notice that when we open this, similar to like Max Maps or other things, this will open up in a new window. So if I just drag this away, you'll see my project file is still open in the background. So one thing of note here, let me manage this. When you're using this, if you have the opportunity to have like a dual screen setup, or if you can get some space in a study room or something like that, or you can have a bigger screen, that's really going to make this process easier as you go to add elements into your QTT workspace. It's going to be a lot easier to have sort of both of those displays up separately, so you can kind of flip back and forth. But it is possible to do it on a single screen. I'm working on a single screen today, so it is certainly possible to do that. When you open up your QTT workspace, you'll see up at the top, you've got your basic commands to create new worksheets. You'll have a list of your current worksheets. So in our project file, we currently only have the one worksheet. We'll be creating one in a second. You can, you can delete worksheets and you can export. And so I'll be showing you this at the end of this basic sort of overview. You'll get to see the actual product that gets generated from this workspace. So if you are working on a single screen, one kind of handy feature is you can minimize that, so you can have a little bit more workspace here. Every QTT workspace is going to have the components. It's going to have your title, your subject, and your research question. Title really is going to be just used when you are exporting elements to your QTT worksheet. So it's good to have something meaningful here. If you have just a whole bunch of generic names, it can be hard to work with multiple worksheets. So do try and pick something meaningful there. Your subject, when you create a new worksheet, you will actually need to fill out all of these pieces of information. So the subject is basically just the general concept. What is it that you're working with? So in this case, we have work-life balance and cognitive well-being. So kind of a general theme. And then your research question is going to be probably a little bit narrower. So we're looking at specifically the separation between work and free time. How do they contribute to cognitive well-being? You can do multiple research questions here. Totally fine. You have as much space as you want here. You'll find, though, that as we import elements, that the way that things get organized, it's probably best to maybe have only one or two research questions here. As you get more experience, you could maybe add in some more. But as you get started out with this, it's probably better to keep it on the shorter end of things to keep that organization going. So you'll see the next piece here, you will have 7 tabs here for the different elements that you can pull into your workspace. What's cool about this is these are actually customizable, so I can rearrange these. So right now I have related codes and themes as my first. If I wanted to move this around, I can basically just click and drag, and I can move that over. And so now important segments is my first piece. The other thing that's of note, when you go to export this workspace, it will be lined up in this order. So for example, the end piece here, integration of insights, where you sort of stitch all of these different pieces together. If you wanted this at the top of your report, you could basically drag this all the way over. And then so this would be first up in your Word document that gets exported. For the time being, though, we're going to leave this at the end. Just conceptually, it makes a little bit more sense for our purposes. And we'll stick this back to where it was at the beginning. Okay, so you've got your different sections here. We'll just kind of go through these and give you a sense of what they are and sort of how you might use them in your project. Related codes and themes, this is going to be pulled in from your actual code system. So you can pull in as many codes as you would like. And depending on the methodological approach, you might be treating them differently. In this case, these are we're looking at these as basically just codes that have been assigned to things. So again, that could change depending on the approach that you've taken in your project. Most elements in QTT, when you pull them in, they are static in that it is sort of a snapshot of an element in time. So it's where your object is. So if your project changes after you pull in an element, that will not be reflected. The exception to that is right here with your related codes and themes. So for example, you're pulled in here, you have your code memos, which is kind of handy. It has the tooltip, and also if you click on it, you get actually a really nice clean view of your code memo. So you can get sort of a definition. If you've done code summaries, you can get that. Linked codes as well will show up here. So all of those pieces will maintain here. You have linked memos. So if you have when you create memos, if you've linked certain codes to those, you can actually pull those in as well. So really there's I think there's a really varying degree of functionality here depending on how much of this sort of pre-work that you've done before you pull things into QTT, which is sort of alluding to what I mentioned at the top of the session, in that this really is something that's going to come after a fairly significant amount of analysis is done. I think that there is potential to use this as a developmental piece if you're developing maybe a way to look at a specific theme in your project, but I think where it really shines would be towards the later stages of a project where you're really trying to create a final deliverable. So back on this piece here, coded segments. So the QTT does not display all of the actual coded segments. What it does do is it links you to the overview of coded segments tables. And what's nice about that is this means any changes that you make will be reflected. So if I add or remove a segment to my code, it will show up in this table, or it will not show up in this table if I've removed it. So that's really the only element in QTT that's going to be sort of have that live functionality that you see in a lot of other places in MAXQDA. If you want something that has all of those coded segments, you're probably going to want to go, rather than QTT, you'll want to go to your reports function and build one from there. That will give you those coded segments if that's what you're looking for. Okay, so that's the first piece, and then you'll notice that you have your element in the middle here, and at the bottom, this is where this function really shines. You have your insights. And if you've done some work in MAXQDA, which this is an advanced session, so I'm assuming most of you have, you'll probably recognize that this looks an awful lot like a memo. And that's basically what it is. So you have all the same functionality that memos carry. You have the timestamp function, which I think is going to be really useful for this if you're doing this sort of over time. You can keep track of those changes or additions that you add. You have all the same customization about fonts and sizes, bold, italics, all that stuff. If you right-click in here, you can insert tables. If that's a way that you like to keep track of your notes or your analysis, you can do that as well. And you can also paste in other things, like if you have images, if you have visualizations or something from MAXQDA, you could also import that, paste that here inside the Insights window. So lots of functionality here. In fact, QTT, even in the manual, is described almost as like a super memo. It just has a little bit more functionality than your typical memo would be in a project. So that's kind of the basic layout that you'll see in all of these things, is you have your element in the middle of the screen, and then you have your insights at the bottom, which is where you're taking sort of notes. You're sort of stitching these pieces together, saying how do all of these different related codes and themes go towards answering the specific research question that you've set up here. So if we move on to the important segments, you'll notice this one's a little bit different. Oh, that's one thing I should mention. If you have like a trad or a scroll bar, if you hover in here and scroll, it will go to the next item. So be a little bit careful about where you use that. The important segments, these are actual segments of text. So these you would pull in individually. So I'll show you how to do that in a second, how to add these particular segments. And they give some pretty good instructions here. You can drag and drop, but you can also right click from a couple of different locations to pull in specific segments that you might like. What's cool about this is customizable as well. So if I want to move this stuff around, I can move it in order. So if there's a particular quote, particular piece of text that I think is very valuable, I can drag it to the top end of my to my display here. Once again, you have your insight box at the bottom to try and stitch all of this together into some kind of synthesized sort of piece of information. Summary tables are the next piece. This is a little bit different in terms of adding because you'll basically click this box and it will allow you a dialog box here where you're able to choose which summary tables that you want to include. I should note that if you don't have one of these elements, let's say your project file doesn't have any summary tables and you want to remove this tab, you can just simply right click and you can remove this from your worksheet and it no longer is displayed. So when you go to export this into a Word doc, it will no longer be visible, which can be kind of nice if you don't have it in your particular project. Memos are another one. And again, these are customizable, so I can drag these around. I can move these if I want to edit these, edit the order of these things. And again, you have a singular insight box down at the bottom. One thing I should point out with summary tables, if you have more than one, you will have more than one insight box. So each summary table gets its own insight field. And I mean, if you think about it, that kind of makes sense that your summary table is kind of a contained piece of analysis. So you would want to be able to write notes about that one particular piece. That's the same with visuals and statistics. Each visualization will give its own insight box. And I think the visuals and statistics really is a super useful part for QTT. If you've done analysis, you've probably run up against it where you've created a visualization, you stored it in a file somewhere and you can't remember where the file is, and you have to come back and recreate that work. Or you might create a visualization, you know where it is, but you don't remember what it was particularly, what was particularly interesting or relevant in the context of your own analysis. What the QTT workspace does is it really forces you to add those insights at the time of incorporation. So it's a really good habit to get into of taking those notes right away, just like you would on a code memo or a code comment. So this can be a really helpful feature. And you'll see in a second here when I demonstrate the export function that these are directly connected. So that insight sticks right with the visualization. So you're not having to copy and paste so much stuff. And copying and pasting into Word documents is sometimes a very frustrating a feat, depending on how things are formatted. So it basically just sort of streamlines things a bit for you and can get you into a more systematized routine in terms of taking notes about what it is you're seeing. And then the last piece here, similar to visualizations, is your concept maps. So if you build out concept max maps, you can export those directly from max maps, or you can grab them from here via the add elements function. So you can actually pull them in. And again, each max map will give its own insight box. So you'll be able to take notes on each specific visualization. Then the final piece, kind of the where this whole thing comes together is the integration of insights. So you've taken all these notes, you have all these insights on all these different pieces of information, and they all show up here with one final insight box, integration of insights, where you're able to stitch all of this together. One thing that I think is pretty cool here, if you have a ton of information, which we have quite a bit here, it may be a little bit overwhelming if you have a lot of stuff. So you can actually zoom in on particular pieces. So if you're at one stage of your integration and I say, I just want to look at this two cases model, I don't want to be confused by any of the rest of this stuff, I can right click, I can say hide insights from other sections, and I will get just my, my concept maps, my two cases model concept map. So it can be nice to sort of limit how much you're looking at, just to kind of make things go a little bit smoother for you. And then you can get those back. So that's kind of what the basic features, how all these things are and sort of their purpose. Let me go ahead and open this back up. I'm going to export this worksheet now and give you a look at what that polished report looks like. So you'll want to have a file. So if I save that, this is going to ask me basically about macros. And you'll want to allow this because it will create a table of contents for your file. So if I open this up, you can see in my my webinar folder now I have a worksheet. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And this again is going to ask, am I okay with these macros? And you want to say yes. And what that does is it creates a title. want to zoom down right to my visuals and statistics, I can hit Control and I can click and it'll pop me right down there. And you'll see that these are connected. I've got my visualization and I have all of my text, my insights that are attached to that visualization. So this is a really nice way to incorporate all of these pieces into a nice document. And I mean, you wouldn't have to turn this particular piece in as a deliverable. If you wanted to work on it in a different program or a different document, you can, all of these, you can copy, cut and paste all of this stuff. It's just a nice way to keep everything organized within MAXQDA rather than popping back and forth between your text editor and MAXQDA. So that's what that document looks like. I'm going to go ahead and create a new worksheet now to sort of just give you a quick idea of what it looks like to actually import this stuff. So we'll create a new worksheet. We'll call this, for our purposes, we'll just call this demo worksheet. I'm actually going to go back here. We're going to use this code from our code system today, this wishes for the future, which if we take a look at it, is about, imagine that you have achieved an ideal work-life balance. How would a typical workday look for you? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to pull this over into my new worksheet. So go to QTT, create a new worksheet, say demo worksheet, copy paste this in there. And we're going to look specifically here about how does we'll just say a respondent, I think these are actually interviews mostly, but how does a respondent's conception of free time describe the subject above, something like that, just an example. This is maybe a little bit simplistic, but just to give you an idea of how this all works. You note that you have to fill all this stuff in before you can even click OK. So MAXQDA is kind of forcing you to do the legwork there to get this working. And so we've got a blank file here now. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the particular codes that we just saw for that wishes for the future. So I'm going to add these. I'll just click these, highlight them. And there's one up here in work-life balance. We've got free time and self-care. We're going to add that in as well. So I'll click OK. And there's my coded segments. And again, like anything else, if I wanted to, I can customize this. I can drag these around. If there was one that I wanted to leave at the head here as this a little bit more value, and then your sort of your insights would go here. I'm running short on time, so I'm going to skip a little bit of that process today. But basically, you would, at this point in your project, you would probably have a pretty good sense of what these codes are about, and you would be using this space as a way to sort of pull some of that stuff together. The important segments. This one's a little bit different in terms of getting the data in. So I'm gonna minimize this window, or not minimize, but resize. And if you're working again on two screens, you can see why it's a little bit helpful. But I'll Windows wants to snap this for some reason. We'll leave that here. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You can drag thin. So if I look over here, for example, this code on flexibility maybe is interesting to me. I can grab it here and I can just drag and drop, and then my code is in. Additionally, if I scroll back up, okay, I've got well-being assessment. This is interesting. I can right-click and you'll see this icon over here. That's the same as our QTT. I can send to my demo worksheet, and then this will pop in. You'll hear a little whoosh noise, which I don't know if you hear that. I get it in my headphones, but it'll pop into your just here. Additionally, to give you a little bit more fine-grained control on this, you could add in, oops, I don't know why that came undocked. You can add in the retrieve segments window. So if I wanted to look, I knew there was something that Riley said in her interview about flexibility that was particularly interesting. I can come down to my retrieve segments window. Here it is. And I can drag and drop this. And then I've got it in here. Another thing that's pretty cool, if I scroll down, you'll see my code comment comes along. So if you've done a lot of annotation in your project, you're not going to miss that. It's going to come along with your coded segments, which is really great. So that's one easy way to do that. You can also, if you want to work with a particular code, you can double click, pull up your overview of coded segments. I can drag and drop rows from here, and that will get pulled into my QTT, or I can right click as well and send things to QTT. So there's a lot of different ways to get sort of important segments in. You'll have to find one that sort of fits your own working style, whether you like to use the overview or if you like to use the retrieve segments windows. Summary tables, those are pretty straightforward. The best way to do that, if you've created them in your project, you'll know that they exist. You can simply just add them from this window here. And I'm going to select all to show you what it looks like when you have multiples. You'll see that each summary table has an insight window. So I can do insights on both of those, and then those will be reflected when I get to my integration of insights. Related memos is also a little tricky. If you've worked with memos, if you use memos a lot, you can find a ton of them in your project, and it's hard sometimes to keep track of them. If I use this add elements feature, on those cases where I know what they are, like if I'm looking at a document system memo, I'm pretty sure I know what that is, right? Those make sense. Those are kind of structural things. But if I do my in-document memos, in-document memo 16, that doesn't really tell me a whole lot. I have no idea what that means. There's an easier way to add that. So I'm going to show you how to do this. You're going to actually minimize, and then I'm going to come over to my memos and my all memos, which will open up my memo manager. And then if I close my code memos, so I'm in my in-document memos here, and I now see, okay, memo 16, this is from Riley's interview. I know where that was. And if I click it here, I get the text, importance of internal motivation, fulfillment. Okay, so that's some of my researcher notes that I brought in. And if I click on this, it actually brings it up in the document browser behind, so I know the actual text that this is linked to. So this gives me a lot more context in terms of pulling this data in. Now that I know, okay, I know what this is, I want it, I can come up here, send to QTT worksheet, demo worksheet, and it gets pulled in. So if I pull up my QTT, there it is. There's my memo. So you can use this if you are very, very, very diligent of changing the names for your memos. You'll probably be okay. If you're not, you'll probably need to use that feature I just showed you with the memo manager to make sure that you actually know what you're adding. Visuals and statistics is one that's also a little bit different. So this, you need to use that icon again to send. It's the only way that you can get those, because MAXQDA does not store those visualizations in the project file. You have to create them. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to minimize my QTT. Let's come over to Visual Tools. I'm just going to make a quick code matrix browser. So let's go ahead and do the Berlin interviews. And let's go ahead and we'll just do work situation. So I'm going to make a code matrix browser for the activated documents and codes. Okay, I've got my visualization here. Now in the past, you would just copy this to your clipboard, then you'd put it in a Word doc. Here, I can just do send to QTT worksheet, put it in my demo, I get my little whoosh noise, open up my table or my QTT, and here it is, my code matrix browser. And again, what's nice about this is I can immediately take notes. So I could talk about, the distribution in my interview is interesting, and that Riley and Salim talk about amount of hours the most, or something like that, something that's relevant to your particular question. The last piece here then is your concept maps. And these, again, if you've created these, you should probably already know that they exist. So you can select them from this document. If you want another way, you can also, just like we did with the visualization, you can come to your Max Maps window. It's taking a second to load here. And I can see all of the different models that I've created. Let's say I want to do this Andy single case model. Again, I have my icon, send to QTT worksheet. I'll pick my demo worksheet. Okay, I've got my noise that I heard again in my headphones. And if I open up my worksheet, Here it is. It's been included now in my QTT workspace, and I can include any of my notes that I may have. So it will probably take a little bit of time for you to get comfortable with how you get data in and out, but I think that there is quite a bit of utility in terms of how you can bring all these things together. You know, as you build these big project files and you do all these little bits of analysis, they're kind of living all over the place. And if you've got a good system where you can pull those things into Word documents or something else that you use, it can, you can do that pretty well. But I think having this all integrated in MAXQDA and being able to move things with just the click of a button saves you a little bit in terms of having to copy and paste and worry about formatting, dropping 12 pages in a Microsoft Word document or something like that. So I think that takes me through sort of my planned content for today.